In March 2020, the American government did something it had never done before at this scale. It handed out money, fast, to almost anyone who asked. No payroll checks against IRS records, no verification that your business existed, no confirmation that your employees were real. You filled out a form, certified that your information was true, and within days, sometimes hours, money arrived in your bank account. The idea was simple and genuinely well-intentioned. COVID had shut down the economy overnight. Millions of people were losing their jobs, their businesses, their livelihoods. Congress moved with extraordinary speed to push nearly $800 billion in emergency loans to small businesses, another $900 billion in expanded unemployment benefits, and $415 billion through a disaster loan program. Get the money out fast, save jobs, keep families afloat. Speed was the priority. Verification was an afterthought. What followed was the largest theft of public funds in American history. Estimates of the total stolen range from $280 billion to over $400 billion. To put that in perspective, that is more money than the entire annual GDP of Portugal. Gone, looted, spent on Lamborghinis, Maldives hotel villas, diamond rings, and chartered luxury yachts while the pandemic was still killing people. And as of 2024, less than 1% of it has been recovered. To understand how this happened, you have to understand what the government actually built. The Paycheck Protection Program, the PPP, was launched in April 2020. It offered forgivable loans to small businesses. Forgivable meaning if you used the money for payroll and qualifying expenses, you never had to pay it back. The government would just cancel the debt. The Economic Injury Disaster Loan Program, EIDL, offered low-interest loans for operating expenses, and the expanded Federal Pandemic Unemployment Compensation Program pushed emergency jobless benefits through state agencies across the country. Combined, these three programs dispersed over $2 trillion in relief. The critical decision that opened the door to everything that followed was made deliberately and in the name of speed. The government removed the standard verification requirements that would normally apply to loans of this size. Instead of checking payrolls against IRS records, confirming businesses actually existed, or verifying employee counts, the programs relied on self-certification. You signed a document saying your information was true. That was it. The SBA's own internal audit later described this as an invitation to fraud, which, to be fair, is exactly what it was. Within weeks of the PPP launching, the instructions were circulating on social media and encrypted messaging apps. One widely shared text message read, "You need to apply. $10,000 guaranteed. They do not check for anything. It is all automated." That text was accurate. Completely verifiably accurate. David Hines was a Miami businessman who owned several moving companies in South Florida. He applied for $13.5 million across 4 companies, falsely claiming more than 70 employees and $4 million in monthly payroll. One of his bank accounts had a balance of 30 cents before the loan arrived. He received $3.9 million. Within days, he wired $318,000 to a car dealer for a Lamborghini Huracan. He also spent money at the Fontainebleau and the Setai, 2 of the most expensive hotels in Miami Beach. He made none of the payroll payments he had certified he would make. Federal agents arrested him in July 2020. They seized the Lamborghini, they seized $3.4 million from his accounts. The Hines case became the first major public face of PPP fraud and generated the image that would define the entire scandal going forward. A man, a sports car, public money, zero shame. But Hines was just one person acting alone. What happened at the organized level was something else entirely. Richard Ivazian lived in Encino, California. He had a prior bank fraud conviction from 2011, which should have disqualified him from relief programs entirely, which is exactly why he did not apply under his own name. Ivazyan, together with his brother, wife, sister-in-law, and several associates, built a fraud ring that submitted 150 fraudulent loan applications. They used stolen identities of dead people, foreign exchange students who had left the country years earlier, fully fabricated persons. At one point, someone in the ring uploaded photos of Barbie dolls as identification documents. They were still approved. The ring received over $20 million and used it to buy mansions in Tarzana, Glendale, and Palm Desert. Gold coins, diamonds, luxury watches, a Harley-Davidson motorcycle. And then in June 2021, a federal jury convicted them. Ivazyan and his wife were placed under house arrest with ankle monitors while awaiting sentencing. In August 2021, they cut off the ankle monitors. They packed bags, left their 3 children behind with grandmothers, and fled to Montenegro. They left a typewritten goodbye note that read, "We will be together again one day. This is not a goodbye, but a brief break from each other." The FBI offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to their arrest. It took 14 months. They were found in Montenegro and extradited back to Los Angeles. The sentencing judge called Ivazyan an endemic, cold-hearted fraudster who views fraud as an achievement. He was sentenced to 17 years in federal prison. His wife received 6. One detail from their case that does not appear in most coverage: at one point, Ivazyan and his wife waited just 3 days after her father died before filing a fraudulent loan application in the dead man's name. 3 days. Meanwhile, in Atlanta, a reality television personality named Maurice Fain was watching the same opportunity. Fain was known on VH1's Love and Hip Hop Atlanta as Arkansas Mo. He owned a trucking company in Georgia called Flame Trucking. He had also been running a Ponzi scheme defrauding investors since 2013, and he owed restitution from a previous fraud case. In April 2020, Fain submitted a $3.7 million PPP application, claiming his trucking company had 107 employees and a monthly payroll of $1.49 million. In reality, the payroll barely existed. He received the money. He spent $85,000 on custom jewelry, including a Rolex Presidential, a diamond bracelet, and a 5.73 carat diamond ring. He leased a Rolls-Royce Wraith for $136,000. He paid $40,000 in overdue child support. He also used public relief funds to pay restitution from his previous fraud conviction. He was sentenced to 17.5 years in federal prison. But these individual cases, as outrageous as they are, were not the systemic problem. The systemic problem was what happened with the fintech companies. When the PPP launched, 2 Arizona-based technology companies called Blue Acorn and Womply positioned themselves as middlemen between small businesses and SBA-approved lenders. They would handle the application process, collect a fee from the government for each approved loan, and make the whole thing faster and more accessible. This sounded reasonable. It was not. Together, Blue Acorn and Womply facilitated nearly 1 in 3 PPP loans issued in 2021. They received over $1 billion in fees from the government for this service. They spent less than 1% of those fees on fraud detection. Blue Acorn had a single direct employee processing 1.7 million loan applications. Their fraud department was run by a woman whose previous professional experience was operating an online clothing shop. She hired at least 30 friends and family members, including a recent high school graduate, to underwrite the applications. Their loan reviewers were instructed to spend a maximum of 30 seconds per application. 30 seconds! And they were pressured to push through anything that was not obviously fraudulent. Blue Acorn also created an internal fast track called VIPPP, a special lane named after the program itself that prioritized the largest loans generating the highest fees regardless of fraud indicators. The CEO of one of their partner banks privately emailed that the fraud controls were a bit late because the horse had been out of the barn for a while. And Nathan Race, the co-founder of Blue Acorn, the man running this operation, submitted his own fraudulent PPP loan application identifying himself as a black veteran. He is neither black nor a veteran. He and his wife allegedly pocketed over $120 million in taxpayer-funded processing fees from the same program they were simultaneously defrauding. Stephanie Hawkridge, his co-founder, was convicted of conspiracy to commit wire fraud in June 2025. And then there was Amy Bach. Bach ran a Minnesota nonprofit called Feeding Our Future, which she had founded in 2016 as a legitimate meal program sponsor. The organization handled $3 to $4 million annually in normal times. Then COVID emergency rule changes removed standard oversight requirements for meal program sponsors, and Bach saw what everyone else saw in 2020, an open door. She expanded explosively. She created a network of over 250 sham meal sites across Minnesota. Many were empty storefronts, some were private homes. She billed the federal government for 125 million fake meals served to children who did not exist in a state where that many children do not even exist. The fake attendance sheets listed children with names like Man Sincere, Ron Donald, and John Doe. One defendant claimed to serve more children meals at his Safari restaurant each day than attend Minnesota's largest high school. He was reimbursed without question. When the Minnesota Department of Education grew suspicious and tried to stop processing payments in 2021, Bach sued the state alleging racial discrimination. A judge ordered the state to continue processing her applications and fined the Education Department $47,500 for being too slow to process them. So while a court was ordering the government to keep paying her fraudulent claims, Bach and her associates were photographed at overwater villas in the Maldives, popping champagne at the Radisson Blu Resort with money literally meant to feed hungry schoolchildren. The FBI raided Feeding Our Future locations across Minnesota in January 2022. Attorney General Merrick Garland called it the largest pandemic relief fraud in the country. 47 defendants were initially charged. That number eventually rose to 70. During the trial itself, an associate of Bach flew in from Seattle and followed a juror home after the first day of closing arguments. 2 days later, she handed a bag containing $120,000 in cash to the juror's relative and said there would be more if the juror voted to acquit. The juror reported it. 5 people were subsequently indicted for jury tampering. Bach was convicted on all counts in March 2025. She was ordered to forfeit her Porsche, her designer bags, and $5.2 million in assets. Total fraud in her case is now estimated to top $350 million. The total scale of what happened across all programs is almost impossible to process as a single number. The SBA Inspector General estimated at least $136 billion in fraudulent EIDL loans and $64 billion in fraudulent PPP loans. The Government Accountability Office estimated over $100 billion stolen from the unemployment program alone, at least half of that by international fraudsters routing money to West Africa and Eastern Europe. The Associated Press calculated approximately $280 billion stolen and another $123 billion wasted or misspent across all COVID programs combined. That is roughly 10% of the $4.2 trillion dispersed. And the real-world consequences did not stay inside the numbers. A UC Berkeley study found that housing prices in high-fraud zip codes rose 5.8 percentage points more than in low-fraud areas, permanently pricing out ordinary buyers from communities where the stolen money had been converted to real estate. 5 million California workers had legitimate unemployment payments delayed because the system was overwhelmed with fraudulent claims. And millions of identity theft victims received IRS 1099-G tax forms demanding they pay income tax on unemployment benefits they never received, because a fraudster had claimed those benefits in their name. As of 2024, the DOJ has charged over 3,500 defendants across all COVID programs and recovered $1.4 billion. $1.4 billion. Out of 280 billion minimum, that is less than 1%. Here is what this story actually is, when you look at it without flinching. The people who designed the programs without fraud controls have never been held accountable. The average sentence for the people who exploited those programs is 31 months. 3,500 defendants, 31 months average, less than 1% recovered. The money is gone. It is in the housing market, in the inflation data, in the IRS notices sent to identity theft victims, who never saw a dollar of what was claimed in their name. If stories like this matter to you, keep watching. Subscribe so you never miss a case that needs to be told. Until next time.